video. This video is going to be a little bit different, I would say, compared to the typical stories I've covered. And the reason for that is because this case, seriously, is just bizarre. It's definitely true crime, and there I'm still gonna give our typical disclaimer that true crime content can be very sensitive in nature. That's not gonna change with this video, but this is just one of the most bizarre cases that I have come across thus far. So please, if you are triggered by sensitive topics like murder, assault, please exit the video now. Your mental health is incredibly important, and I want you to honor that. If you are not triggered by such topics and are a true crime lover like myself, I invite you to stay and enjoy this video. So, and just one other thing, if you can hear more background like airflow, fan type of sounds, I'm sorry. It is a very, very hot day where I live. It's just about 8 o'clock at night and it's still 100 degrees outside, so turning the air off is just a no-go. But I hope it's not too bothersome for you. But let's go ahead and jump in to our story today. So, the path to greatness is aspired by many people. But the question is, what is their definition of greatness, and how far are some people willing to go to achieve it? Some people will sacrifice their time and money. Some will sacrifice their passion and hobbies. But other people will take their hunger to excel to a whole new level. And oftentimes, when people take it to such extreme lengths, we may even classify those people as psychopaths. History is full of stories of those that are willing to achieve greatness at whatever cost and feel entitled to misuse their power in any manner that they deem necessary. And so we're going to talk about a person that did just this. A man by the name of Ahmad Siraji was a serial killer shaman in Indonesia that came from a small town by the name of Aman Damai, which is also translated to peace and tranquility, which is very ironic. And this man was revered by his community as a powerful shaman, but he was driven to take the lives of 42 young women in his quest for greatness. So, let's talk about this mystic healer. In Indonesia, on April 24th of 1997, a 21-year-old female named Sri Kamala Dewi needed spiritual assistance to help with the turmoil that she was experiencing in her life. She believed that there was only one person who could help her, and one person the community would speak of in whispers. And this mystic healer was known locally as the Datuk. And as mentioned earlier, the mystic healer, the Datuk, was Ahmad Siraji, and he would go by many nicknames throughout his life, including Nasib Keliwang, Datuk Merengue, or even the Sorcerer. But for Sri Kamala, the Datuk's name did not matter. What mattered was that he could help her in ways that others could not. Sri Kamala was a secretive woman, preferring to keep her life private. She asked a 15-year-old rickshaw owner named Andreas Suido to take her to the Datuk, but begged that he keep this a secret and never tell a soul that he had taken her there. So Andreas drops her off near the residence of the Sorcerer and pedals away as fast as he possibly could, because he heard some very, very strange noises coming from the home. Now, Andreas would eventually break this promise, but we will talk about that later. So, between the years of 1986 and 1997, the Sorcerer Siraji killed at least 42 young girls and women between the ages of 11 and 30 as part of an ongoing ritual that required, in his mind, 70 victims in total. Siraji lived in Medan in the North Sumatran region of Indonesia, where he worked as a cattle breeder. He claimed to be a dukun, which is a class of shaman who are said to hold supernatural powers. Word had spread around local villages of these healing powers that he possessed. So more people would go to see him to, gain advice or assistance with whatever problems they were having at the time. However, before he would give guidance or healing of any kind, he charged people and essentially made this a business for himself. And the going rate for his services was approximately what would be essentially $300 US. And for women that would come to see him, specifically wanting him to use his powers to make them more sexually attractive to men, he would charge even more. And belief in sorcery and supernatural powers is fairly commonplace in Indonesia, but it's even more widely accepted in more rural or lower income areas. In 1986, Siraji's deceased father visited him in a dream and commanded him to drink the saliva of 70 dead females as part of a larger black magic ritual. But I guess, as is not surprising, I would say, he believed that this was a real commandment from his father, and so he began this ritual. He did say that it would have taken him far too many lifetimes to encounter 70 dead women, and so his killing spree began. He decided that the only way to see this ritual through would be to do the killing himself. So that's exactly what he did. He goes on his killing spree in order to drink his saliva and speed up the process of gaining even more magical powers. So, Siraji ends up marrying 3 sisters who end up living with him on his plantation and took care of his every need. He had shared with his wives the visitation from his father and what needed to be done. And when he talked about this, he claimed that by killing these 70 women, he would become more powerful and be able to perform more elaborate and compelling acts of supernatural magic, including becoming a true mystic healer. And here is a quote from Siraji. It says, "My father did not specifically advise me to kill people. So I was thinking, it will take ages if I have to wait to get 70 women. I was trying to get it as fast as possible, so I took my own initiative to kill." So clearly this guy is crazy. Remember earlier I said this is a bizarre case. Siraji, man, I don't know. This whole thing is just wild to me, but there you go. There's his explanation for why he does what he does. So, for many women, they felt as though their time with Siraji had been beneficial. But for at least 42 of them, it was not so. At least 42 women were strangled and buried in the ground up to their necks on his sugarcane plantation. Yes, you heard that right. He did not bury their whole bodies. He buried up to their necks, right here, and left their heads above the soil. What? Okay, sir, you're crazy. Siraji chose the victims from the women that came to visit him for spiritual guidance and magical assistance. Enough women were coming to him, but when he had a gap with no victims, he would purposefully go out to seek prostitutes and homeless women. He would take them into the nearby sugarcane fields where he had the victims dig their own hole before burying them up to their necks. Psycho. They believed, this is what is crazy, these women believed it was all a part of this magical ritual healing. They trusted this man and thought that digging this hole was going to, help them in whatever endeavors they came to see him for assistance. But no, this man was completely manipulating them and just had them dig their own graves. What? Okay, so during the process of digging their own graves, they would typically end up getting stuck in the mud. And at this point, Siraji would strangle them until they were dead and then would proceed to drink the saliva from their mouths. Then he would remove the clothes of the victims and planted them in such a way that not only were their heads above the ground, but the heads would face his house. And he believed by positioning them this way that it gave him even more powers. Now, as you can imagine, by this time when over 40 women have gone missing, people start to talk, right? People start to notice something is not right. I imagine the whispers and gossip started well before the number got to 42, because it's not normal when one person goes missing. It's not normal when two, and as the numbers start to climb, the whispers grew more and more and more. But with all these whispers and things that people were saying, they weren't able to, completely tie this to Siraji. And one of the biggest reasons for this is because when the women would go to see him, it was very secretive, so they wouldn't disclose that information to many people, if anybody at all. They didn't want people to know they were going to see this mystical healer. And so this secret really made it difficult to link anything to Siraji. However, that would all change when the body of Sri Kamala was discovered. So a couple of days after her body is discovered, Andreas, our friend Andreas from earlier, the rickshaw driver, heard about the discovery, and he knew that he had to say something. So he ends up going to the police and tells them that he had dropped Sri Kamala off at the home of Siraji. On April 30th of 1997, police visited the property and found items belonging to Sri Kamala, including her purse. Siraji ends up being arrested for her murder and did not put up any kind of fight. He actually ends up just openly confessing to her murder and the murders of at least 42 other females, and shared that he murdered them in the same manner. This is a quote that he shares after his arrest. "We are all human beings. We have our own strengths and weaknesses. If I remember correctly, I have murdered 42 women. I did not suspect I was going to get caught. I did not try to run away when I saw the police because I had resigned to my fate. When the investigation turned to excavating the sugarcane plantation, 42 bodies were found, with some so far along in the decomposition process that they were unidentifiable. Siraji's 3 wives were investigated after the murders were discovered, but only one was charged as an accomplice. Her name was Dumini, and she went on trial at the same time as Siraji. She would ultimately receive the death penalty, but it was later commuted to just life in prison. And his other 2 wives apparently had no knowledge of the murders or the ritual, and ultimately left the area. Now, I do not know how people living on the plantation would not be aware that this was taking place. Like, okay, not only are you having multiple women come to the plantation, but they're being buried around the plantation with their heads sticking out of the ground. I don't know how far into the fields this was done. It sounds as though you certainly couldn't see the heads just popping up by the house, which I suppose that makes sense, because if you were having people come to the house for services, if they saw heads sticking out of the ground, they would completely run away and freak out. So now that I'm thinking this through, they probably were hidden. And I don't know if, maybe he was extra controlling and had a rule that these two wives could only go so far on the property. I don't know, but it was determined that they were not involved. However, Siraji himself was sentenced to death, and he did not escape this fate like his wife. On July 10th of 2008, he was executed by firing squad, even though he attempted to have a last-minute appeal. He was allowed one last liaison with his convicted wife, Tumini, before he was let out to the firing range. Siraji's body was supposed to be buried in a public cemetery. However, the police or whoever oversaw this in the community was forced to cancel this plan, because up to 100 relatives of the women were waiting there, planning to completely disrupt the funeral, which is understandable. So that plan did not move forward. Although he was linked to these 42 murders and confessed to the 42 murders, there were reports at the time that over 80 people had actually gone missing in the area, and many people believe that Siraji actually reached his goal of the 70 murders and being able to drink their saliva. In a final interview with Siraji prior to being executed, he quoted, "The black magic came from God. I do not have it anymore. I have repented. I hope I have a chance to live." So now that we've talked about this very bizarre case, I am going to tell you a little bit of background about Siraji's upbringing. So Siraji was born to a self-proclaimed sorcerer in the interior of Indonesia. It is no wonder that this boy growing up in such an environment would be fascinated by the arts of black magic. He watched his father do this every day, whose name is unknown, earned praise and respect for resolving issues affecting their community. So, his father was doing exactly what he wanted to do in his adulthood. Now, of course, with his father being who he was and doing what he did, this really impacted the way he had a relationship with Siraji. And unfortunately, Siraji was incredibly neglected by his parents. He was described as different as a young boy and struggled to make friends, leaving him alone to really do his own thing growing up. He was very isolated, and it really negatively impacted him. In his case, this loneliness was not good for his mental health and ultimately impacted the way he developed. Because he was lonely and neglected, Siraji did not do well in school and actually began a life of crime. He was only 19 years old when he first went to prison and served 10 years for petty crimes and some degree of violence. Barely 2 years after he was released from prison, Siraji was back behind bars for cattle theft. according to a documentary by Crime Investigation Asia. Upon Siraji's release, he felt as though he needed to do something to shed this bad reputation he had established for himself. He didn't like the way that people looked at him and treated him, so he decided to be like his father, thinking that that would earn him the kind of respect and admiration he was looking for. He ends up saying that he aspired to follow in the footsteps of his father, and that he did not learn sorcery from anyone else but his father. And so this is what begins the journey of sorcery for Siraji, which at the time included helping the people of his community. Locals believed that he could move clouds and heal the sick, as we know, but unfortunately, Siraji had a very dark secret, and we know that in reality, he was one of the most prolific and hideous serial killers of all time. So, that was the story of Ahmad Siraji, who spent 11 years victimizing women who sought him out to get help in their quest for love or help with their marriage. Now, the forensic expert did reveal that Siraji had claimed that none of these murders were ever sexually motivated, so I did just want to call that out. They believed that between his 3 wives, his sexual needs were met, and so this was purely a ritualistic endeavor for him. So that officially concludes the bizarre case of this shaman, sorcerer, murderer. This was wild to me, and I still can't let go of, envisioning the way these bodies and heads were positioned in the sugarcane plantation. That is just something so creepy to me. But, different cultures believe different things, and especially when you believe in, magic, dark magic, black magic at that, this is something that I feel like you would see in a movie. But please let me know what you thought of this wildly bizarre case. I wanted to talk about this one because it was so unique, but also not super, what's the word I'm looking for? Not super, triggering, I guess. This one's probably one of the least triggering videos, I suppose, in the sense that I chose not to include as many details of, like, the murder death process because, sometimes that's just extra heavy, and I don't want to stress anybody out, and I wanted people to be able to listen to this and watch it without feeling the need to exit the video, so I tried keeping this one as PG, I suppose, as possible. So please let me know what you